How to lead a multi-generational team, age diversity in the workplace. Hi, my name is Mike Vannoy, Vice President of Marketing at Asure. And this is a really important topic. I think the whole topic of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, I think sometimes the conversations tend to skew more towards race, in gender, and there's a whole political landscape around these topics today. But I think one of the most important topics that everybody has to address is age diversity, right? Something like 35% of our workforce today are millennials, and it's a smaller number of Gen Z. But by 2025, I think it's about 25% of the workforce is going to be Gen Z. And old guys like me can't just say, oh, the younger generation doesn't get it. That's going to be the workforce, right? So either we don't get it, or our businesses won't succeed. So I have a fantastic guest today to really unpack this topic. Her name is Dr. Eliza Philby. She's a writer, speaker, consultant who specializes in generational intelligence, helping companies, governments, and services understand generational shifts within politics, society, and the workplace. Eliza received her PhD from the University of Warwick and subsequently taught at King's College London and the University of Renmin in China. Her writing has been published in the Times, Guardian, and Financial Times. This year, she was awarded Europa Forum's 2022 Millennial Leaders Award. Eliza is the author of Fueling Gender Diversity, Unlocking the Next Generation Workplace, and Mind the Gap, Managing a Multi-Generational Workforce in a Post-Pandemic Age. And she hosts her own podcast. It's called It's All Relative on the Gender Gap. So can't ask for better credentials than that. Welcome to the show, Eliza.
Well, what an exhaustive bio, Mike. It's great to be on your podcast. What a real pleasure. And thank you for inviting me.
Well, thanks so much. So if I can, and I think we both of us come from our careers from different points of view, right? So when I think of age diversity, I remember, working for big companies and sitting in seminars, going back, 15, 20 years ago, where, the boomers and the Gen X and the millennials, these were almost kind of like new concepts, but they were kind of like big company concepts. Like, we've all heard the term a war for talent. Well, that was coined by a guy from McKinsey back in 1997. These were kind of big company concepts, right? And you throw in a dot-com bubble, you throw in a war, you throw in some crazy presidential and geopolitical politics and election cycles, a recession or two, and a pandemic. And I think so many times we blame those things as the reasons for labor shortages or labor challenges. But here we are post-pandemic with I think the latest number in the U.S. is 3.7% unemployment. The reality is this labor shortage has been highly predictable for 30 years, right? Based on an aging workforce and birth rates and productivity per head count per GDP by country. We've seen this coming, and this is kind of here to stay. Mm-hmm. And this is no longer a big company problem. This is a Main Street problem. Small and mid-sized companies, if you want to have a workforce, you're going to have to compete to hire people and attract people. And that means all people, all sizes, all shapes, all ages, all colors, all backgrounds. So that's kind of the context of why I think this is so critical. Share your thoughts, unpack for me, if you will, why this is so important.
Well, Mike, I think you've alluded to a really important aspect there, which is obviously there's a demographic crisis, right? In the sense that we are all living in an aging society, unless you're in Africa, and there are problems for business with those changing demographics. Predominantly is we're going to have to integrate older workers into the workforce that much more. But then there's a bigger story here, which is age diversity and the expansion of a multi-generational workforce, right? So you now have in most organizations, big, small, medium businesses, 4 generations in the workplace. And that's your baby boomers who are still clinging on to power. There's your Gen Xers who are mostly your C-suite and have reached, finally, in a kind of Prince Charles-like way, assumed the throne, having really been waiting around a long time after the boomers have been holding so much power. And then you've got your millennials and your Gen Zers. And so you have 4 generations in the workplace, all with different ways of communicating, expectations of what work is and its place in people's lives, all different ideas about what work is, what leadership and management looks like, and hell, where you should do work, how you should do work. So you have a generational tension in businesses now that is only going to get bigger, because we may have 4 generations in the workplace now. We are very soon going to have, if we do not have already, 5 generations in the workplace. Right. So the generational gap is real and is not going away. And in a weird kind of way, we talk about gender diversity, we talk about ethnic diversity being key, not just to progressive businesses, but to successful businesses. Well, hell, age diversity is the same thing, because what you need in every business is, yes, you need that entrepreneurial, innovative spirit of youth, but you also need that experience that comes with age. And actually, I think we may talk about generational differences within politics right now, which feels more profound than I think at any time in history.
I agree.
Politics used to be divided by class. It's now divided by age as much as class. And we feel it in our society. We maybe feel it in our families, this real generational gap. And we are feeling it in our businesses. And what I've really sought to do the last 2.5 years, helping companies in the midst of a pandemic where we all had to make the shift very quickly to remote working, and now making the shift to hybrid working or remote working long term, is we are actually encountering each other less, and that's causing an even bigger generational gap. Now, within businesses, you really have to understand that generational diversity and appreciate who Gen Z are, who Millennials are, who Boomers and Gen Xers are, and how they are evolving, because no generation stands still, right? You're confronted with different life stages. Life, takes over. You age, we all age. But it's a very striking stat to say, as was recently discovered in a survey by Microsoft, you are more likely to be friends at work with someone of a different race or gender than of a different generation. Wow. And I think companies now have a real obligation. It's impacting their bottom line, at the very least, a real obligation to bridge that generational divide, because it's costing man hours, it's costing productivity, it's creating a corrosive culture of ageism. And it's really something, in order to secure the best talent, both young and old, in an aging society and in a time of innovation, you need both old and young. So age diversity should be a key business aim.
Eliza, I really want to dive into what are some of the challenges between the generations, and then what practical advice you'd have for the audience. Most of our listeners and watchers of this show are in small and mid-sized companies. They're employers, so this is a really central issue to them. But I think so much of the messaging, I think your background, I kind of shared mine, came out of a kind of big company. I was used to going to conferences where these things were topics. But if you're the small business owner, you're a retailer, you have 2 locations and 18 employees, you're working 15 hours a day trying to grow your business, and you're an expert in whatever line of products you carry. You're not an expert in this sort of thing. You just kind of feel the impact, right? The symptoms of it. But let's start maybe with some definitions. Can you? So you talked about the four buckets: Boomers, Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z. Give us the date ranges here. What makes these groups unique from each other?
Right, and remember, these are arbitrary, but actually really important distinctions that are a starting point for understanding your workforce, not an end point. Right, we're not seeking to advocate you go around your workforce and go, oh my God, you're such a boomer. Oh my God, you're such a Gen Xer. But let's start with the classification. So we have baby boomers born between 1945 to 1964, obviously depending on which country you're talking about. But in the US, it's kind of 1964, 1965. And that's the demographic, let's not forget, that were the benefactors of the economic post-war boom. They were called the baby boom because they are a demographic phenomenon. They have yielded so much economic, political, and business power because there are so many of them, right? And so in many respects, they were the benefactors of the economic boom in the post-war years, the benefactors as well, let's not forget, of the social liberalizing reforms that happened in the 70s and 80s, and then the benefactors of the economic liberal reforms that happened in the 1980s, to the extent that in the US, it's been estimated that boomers hold about 70% of the nation's wealth. And as we know, they are the ones that are already disrupting what retirement looks like and what old age looks like. Many are continuing to stay and remain in the workplace. Many of them are embracing digital culture to the extent that obviously baby boomers are the fastest growing demographic on social media. Facebook is their playground, and it's been estimated that by 2050, profiles of the deceased on Facebook will outnumber profiles of the living.
Wow.
But that sounds quite morbid. But it speaks to the fact, I know Zuckerberg's about to inherit a mass digital graveyard, but the point is, it speaks to the fact that boomers are actually embracing new technology. Okay, so this idea that they kind of are static and are still using analog devices is absolutely not true. You have the boomers, and then you have the Gen Xers. Now, Gen X are the ignored generation in many respects, in the shadow of the boomers, but they are critical for three important reasons. They were the demographic that saw women begin to outnumber men at university, and those professional women went into the workplace and really triggered the conversation that we're still having now about work-life balance. That's the demographic who were the first tech generation, who had the Sony Walkman in their youth. Remember, that was the first piece of personalized technology. And then they became the BlackBerry adults at work. They were the first ones to have technology in the workplace proper. And what's interesting is you look at the data on the lockdowns, it's Gen X who actually made the transition most successfully to fully remote working. And then actually they are also at the moment the squeezed generation, squeezed as they are between looking after their kids. Remember, parenting is now a 30-year financial commitment, and looking after their elderly parents in many respects and incidences. So you have that demographic Gen X who have been waiting in the wings a long time, are now in the kind of C-suite, and now kind of owning the businesses, making the key decisions, but at the heightened point of their caring responsibilities. And then you have millennials. Now, for a long time, we've been slagging millennials off and telling them how awful they are. And actually, we have to remember they're no longer young. They are hitting midlife. They are heading full into their 40s. They are fully aware they're no longer young because we are now managing Gen Zers. And the crucial thing in respect to millennials is they're the in-betweeners. They're the ones that had a foot in the 20th century and all the aspirations and challenges of the 20th century, and a foot in the 21st century, or the aspirations and challenges of the 21st. But they were the kids that were told, if you go to school, get to college, that guaranteed pathway into middle-class professional life will be open to you. And as we know, that promise, particularly in America, where it's already becoming unraveled with, college debt forgiveness and all of that kind of stuff, is that promise was found wanton. And then they are the demographic that came of age with the smartphone. And what the smartphone did, of course, was create that fluidity between your work life and your play and leisure time. And of course, this is the generation, let's not forget, that are not just divided between those that went to college and those that did not, but between those that could rely on the bank of mum and dad and the safety net of mum and dad, and those that could not. So you have with the millennials a delayed entry into adulthood, the delaying of education, delaying of staying at home, the delaying of buying a house, all of those things, which are partly a response to economics, but also self-fulfillment. But also they have had a reliance almost on mum and dad. So you have this tension between a sort of millennial demographic that went to college and didn't go to college, or could rely on mum and dad and could not. And why that's significant for employers to understand is that you have within that demographic an inheritance economy where what you earn and what you learn in life is not as important as what you inherit. And that is a crucial difference to the boomers, who did not inherit and could fulfill that American dream of working their way up and building a home, building a life, building a family, and building and saving for retirement. That's not been a promise fulfilled for millennials. And then you have the demographic after them, Gen Z. They are the experimentals. They are true 21st century kids. They're the demographic who cannot remember the 20th century. Right. And any references you may have, whether it be 9/11, which was a history lesson in school for them, or 2008 crisis that they saw their parents go through, but they themselves didn't go through, is in a sense completely distant for this generation. And why they are critically different from millennials is they are the social media kids who've had a smartphone in their pockets since they were 13, have had access to the world's information and the world's marketplace. And I cannot stress that enough, which means they are not surprised by anything you say, and they have the capacity to make money in other ways than a salary. It has been estimated that this generation will have over 15 different employers over the course of their working life and 5 different careers. Now, who makes up these predictions? I've no idea. But the point stands that this is the generation, I believe, that does not and will not believe in a one salary as financial security. So it's a generation that I think are at the full throes of the disruption in technology and a slight skepticism that comes with technology, a savviness and an entrepreneurial spirit that comes from having a smartphone, a political and slight skeptical vision of the world because they've grown up at a time of populism, of hypocrisy, of racial protests, BLM, climate change activism, complete questioning of, quite rightly in some respects, the social order that prevailed for the last half of the 20th century. And you have this generation of kids who really are disrupting the workplace because they are not necessarily holding on to the values that have gone before. And the reason they're not is because it's the job of every youth, every different generation, to question what has gone before them. And they see millennials, and in that demographic, they see a generation that's worked bloody hard and hasn't got as much as previous generations. And they're like, hang on a minute, I don't want that to be my future self. So they are questioning working culture in a different way. And I would just add one final point is that every generation is shaped by a pivotal experience in your youth, whether it was the sex and drugs and rock and roll of the 60s, or the conscription in the 1940s. And what you have in Gen Z is a generation who has sacrificed 2 years, some places more, of their youth in order to secure the safety of the elderly in society. And that sacrifice was real, and it has meant that they have been most exposed to rising loneliness, mental health issues, and also real challenges in the workplace. Many of them were not working from home. They were working from bed, staring at a green dot for 12 hours a day, feeling increasingly disillusioned. So Those are the 4 generations, each with very different stories.
So something I think about as I've tried to read a lot on all kinds of DIY topics. Generally speaking, I think human beings, regardless of gender, race, age, we're more alike than we are different. But it falls generally in classic bell curves, right? And so there are some things that we can manage each other both up and down and lateral and teams in the same ways. But the shape of these bell curves, there's overlap, but there's also the very real differences. So speak to the what are some of the things that you think that it's okay that this is the way we've managed people or managed relationships or built successful teams forever, and what are the things that still do in fact work that are more tied to humanity versus what are the things on the edges of these bell curves where we kind of collide with each other in our differences that create the challenges?
That's a great question. And I think there's three things that every small to medium employer can do to satisfy basically all four generations. The first thing is give your workers a voice, but enable them to listen to each other. And I think one of the things that you're seeing with Gen Z is a generation that is just expecting to be heard. They're heard on social media, so they want to be heard in the office. So you have a generation that may not raise its voice politically in the workplace, but will raise its voice and expect to be heard. But what I think is really crucial, and by the way, that's something that all generations want. That's what human beings want. Most of all is to be listened to, particularly in hierarchical structures such as politics or the workplace. So a culture of raising your voice.
Can I expand on that? So I completely agree, and I think this is one of the areas where employers can get tripped up. Everyone, I think, has this desire and need to be heard and listened to. Different generations require it, right? So my parents, boomer age, my mom desperately wants to be listened to. That she also bites her tongue probably more than she should, and sits quietly not being listened to and tolerates it. Where my daughter sure as heck is not going to tolerate not being listened to, right? So I think I love where you went there, the difference between a desire and what they require. Maybe that's one of these differences between the generations in some of these categories.
I mean, I agree, but to a certain extent, I would say that boomers have been heard a lot and are finding it definitely very difficult in being shouted out and sidelined by younger generations. I mean, you could see political situations across the world where boomers have found a real difficulty in being silenced and not being heard as much as they used to. They are the first generation, by the way. I don't know what generation your mother is, but boomers were the first generation to really raise their voice as a youthful movement in the 60s and 70s. And ever since, they've dominated the discussion, arguably. So I think I would slightly disagree with you and say, actually, you've got generations now. We're living in this hyper individualistic age where I would say that most people expect to be heard. What they're really bad at, and what bosses and companies need to really get behind, is listening to each other. And we've all become very bad at listening because our mobile phones are brilliant at telling us that we're right and everyone agrees with us, and brilliant at hiding everything that doesn't fit with our worldview. And actually what we really have to do is expose ourselves to things that don't sit well with us, that jar with our values, that are difficult to hear. And I think that in a way, in a work context, that's really important, as it is in a political context, I would argue. So I would say the first thing is that dialogue. The second thing I would say, and again, this is something that Gen Z, I think, are so adept and kind of knowing about, but actually, again, it's something that all generations need, and that's learning in the workplace. Now, that can happen in a very structured, formal way in a big corporate, big multinational, but actually best learning in the workplace happens through osmosis, happens through observation, happens with people just watching other people have difficult conversations with clients, or negotiating a certain deal, or watching a sales pitch, or developing a certain project. It's through watching. And one of the real problems I have with hybrid working is that so much of that learning is being lost. Now, that's not just to the benefit of young people. That is all generations now. If we're working longer, we are going to have to upskill constantly to remain agile. And one of the things that I think is quite prevalent in most businesses is that learning happens to about the age of 35, 40, and then you're just assumed to know what you're doing. And actually, one of the things that really has to happen if we're going to manage an aging workforce is we have to be constantly skilling that aging demographic. And the third thing, and I think the pandemic has really shed a light on this, and again, this is not something that Gen Zers are only talking about. I think it's something that would serve all generations, and that is care. And I use the word care rather than well-being, because I think what we're seeing is a desire for a rewriting of the social contract between employer and employee. I think we saw the instability of jobs and the breakdown of that job for life and that paternalistic responsibility that a boss had for their employees in the 80s. You saw that breakdown. You saw the breakdown of the pension schemes. You saw as a reaction, a much more agile, disloyal worker evolve. And actually, what the pandemic, I think, has highlighted is a need for and a desire for companies to demonstrate their care. Now, that can take a number of forms. That can mean financial care and support, obviously in rising inflation, cost of living, potential recession times. It can mean well-being in the sense that not what resources are you providing for my mental health, but actually how are you impacting my mental health because of the email culture that you have or because of the toxic management culture that exists. Or it can manifest itself in providing care or enabling me as a worker to care and perform my caring responsibilities. So whether it's, are you helping me with childcare? Are you helping me with maternity or paternity leave? Are you helping me with elder care because we're in an aging society and we need to look after our elderly relatives? I think care is a kind of catch-all term that goes and speaks to a desire that all generations have, which is, do I actually feel that my employers care about me and care about me in the round, not care if I can perform my duties, not care if I meet some metrics, but actually know who I am, know what is going on in the background of my life, know how I can best perform these duties, and demonstrates that care, not in an automated way, but in a personal, humane way that demonstrate that human connection that we all crave through our work.
I love that. And I think about, the latitude. This is trying to think of a way that doesn't it sounds stupid, but I think about the latitude a manager has for their different management styles when they demonstrate how much they care, right? So if you can't, if your employee doesn't vibe on your empathy and they don't feel like you care, I believe you're not going to get as much latitude. It's being like, oh, I don't like this about their style. This is wrong about their approach. They made me come to the office here, or this is how we run meetings and this is how decisions are made. Versus, I think people will give each other a lot of grace when they know the other person deeply cares. It's like, my old football coach,
right?
He might scream and yell at me like crazy. And I might think, dude, you're wrong. And I don't like being yelled at, but I know this guy would go to the mats for me. Right. And he's only doing this because he wants us to win as a team. Right. And that may be one of these little red threads that kind of can weave through the generations for all of us to manage as high potentials and the younger generations manage up and older people manage down, is simply genuinely authentic empathy and caring about the outcomes as
right. And do you know what, Mike? You've alluded to something there that made me really think profoundly about you talking about your football coach. That was such a human relationship. That was based on humanity, and that was about testing your resilience. It was about getting the best out of you. That was about camaraderie in the team. That was about earning respect, not expecting it to be automated and already there. I think the thing where we have gone wrong is over the last 20 to 30 years, we have sought to turn humans into robots and weirdly robots into humans. And actually what we need
We're definitely trying to do that.
Age of automation, an age of automation and an age of AI is go, hang on a minute, where's the humanity in work? And the humanity in work is in really demonstrating that care, showing that human commitment and diligence and I think personalization in particularly management style. I would say leadership style requires probably something different. But when we're talking about management, one of the interesting things I've seen with companies is the ones that have the most successful, flexible working policies are not the ones that have kind of like a top heavy line. Okay, you come into the office 2 days a week, 3 days a week, or that idea of a centralized working policy is inherently inflexible, right? The best flexible working policies I've seen are ones that operate completely autonomously within small teams of, say, no more than 15 to 20, where they say, okay, do you know what? I'm doing this and I've got to do this, but you're going to be in the office here and you really stepped up for me on this moment. So I'm going to step up for you on this. And that sense of social obligation and reciprocal responsibility you have to others to be in the room when they need you and for them to be in the room when they, need them. And I think it goes back to the humanity of work, is that really is at the heart of it. What keeps people loyal, committed and belonging is that, okay, do I feel a sense that I'm cared for and understood? And that's not about HR policies. And if anything, small businesses are more equipped to do that than big ones.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to articulate this. You're striking on something for me here. And I'm thinking it's this notion of have to versus get to. So the data is really, really clear on the annual employee engagement studies, right? and there's a barbell of employees who must work in an office, and this is pre-pandemic, but employees who must come to the office and work 5 days of work versus employees who are, by definition, a virtual job and don't have an office to go to, versus those employees who have a choice and they can come and go as they please. The employees' full-time office and full-time home are equally disengaged. The most engaged employees are those that have the most flexibility. And as I think about it, how much of this is a function of choice, right? If I can't force my spouse to love me, but the fact that it is her choice is what makes it, at least I think she does. I love her. It's that freedom to fail, the freedom of the choice that might choose something you don't want, but that's what makes the relationship special. As soon as there's, when it's a choice.
Actually, Mike, you're eminently lovable. The thing, actually, you've hit the nail on the head there, is like almost like the working arrangement was like an arranged marriage, right?
Yeah.
Is that there was a certain level of coercion. And what the pandemic did was people talked about flexibility. I think that's wrong. I think it gave people a sense of autonomy, which is actually more powerful than flexibility. Right?
I agree completely.
The thing that it did is it gave people and I think it reconfigured their relationship with time. They weren't having those water cooler moments with their colleagues. They were having them with their kids. Chaotic as they were having them with their kids. It changed people's relationship with their home, their health, their family. And I'm not saying it wasn't difficult, and obviously experience hugely varied during the pandemic. But for a lot of people, particularly in white collar jobs, there was a recalibration of how people were spending that time and the control they had over that time. And that, unfortunately, a lot of things in history cannot be undone. And I do believe that experience of the pandemic, because it was so prolonged and intense, cannot just be undone, and we cannot see a return to normal. So anyone out there is listening thinking, a recession, that'll get people back into work, that'll get people back into the office. I don't think it will. I hear a lot of CEOs really across the world saying, I think this will be the moment where people go back to the office. I actually don't think it will. You're the opposite. I think people will start going, I can't afford to go to the office. But I think, for a real time, the pandemic was a liberating moment. They could rip off the corporate chains, rip off the lanyard and declare themselves free.
Yeah. I think certainly the next generation behind Gen Z, but certainly definitely the younger end of Gen Z, they're all about exercising choice. I have an employee, no longer an employee. He was awesome. He was a sales development rep. He got promoted into a sales job. He was doing great. And he saved every penny he made for the 2 years he worked for us so that he could travel around the country. He quit his job and he's traveling around the country because what he values is accumulating life experiences right now. Right. And that's not about flexibility. That's about freedom of choice. Right. In getting to do what we want to do. And he may be farther on this end of the spectrum from most people. Not everybody's going to just quit their job and travel for a year, but it certainly speaks to the mindset and what's behind it really is the ultimate freedom, right? Freedom of choice.
And I think we also, and I think the point here is what we're saying is that there's no one size fits all. And what having access to the world's information and the world's marketplace in your pocket since you were 13 has done to a generation is that it's opened up the level of choice. I mean, when I started my first job, I was working in a shoe shop, shining shoes, right? And I had no idea. I had no idea what my friends were doing at that particular point, right? When I started my first office job, which was working in a call center, we sort of had the internet, but didn't have social media. I had no idea what my friends were doing at that particular point. Now, when you get to Gen Z, you have a generation that have made a lot of their own money before they enter the workplace, whether it's buying and selling secondhand clothes or creating content or doing online tutoring, whatever it is, they've had the capacity to do that in non-traditional ways. So they're not working in bars in the same way or doing cleaning or retail. And then they get to the workplace and they're kind of like, there's no allure, there's no romance, there's no like impressive kind of, oh, this is really good, because actually they've already either been making their own money or they've seen other people do it at the same time. So this is the first generation that is going to work, working in an office or working either from home, going on social media and going, oh, that's what other people are doing. That looks more interesting. That looks more glamorous. Oh, maybe I should go on a camper van tour of California. That looks really cool. Or maybe I should save up all my money and invest it in crypto. That looks really cool. Or that constant comparative culture, which we just didn't have when we started work. So that the deference and the allure of work holds no traction for this generation. And that's very difficult for older generations to understand, because they're like, look, you get into this company, you're lucky to be here, you put up, you shut up, you work your way up just like I did. And that's just not how Gen Z, quite rightly I would argue, are computing and understanding the world.
I want to shift gears for a second, if I could, Eliza. So I'm imagining I'm a small business owner watching this show, and I've got 18 employees. And so I'm big enough that I have plenty of challenges, but I'm small enough I don't face these macro issues, right? And I'm like, screw generations. I'm not uncaring, but these are my standards. This is how we run the company. And so this is the type of talent we attract. This is the type of talent we retain. And they end up with this homogenous group, whether it's age, gender, whatever. Can you speak to the actual business impact and the value of age diversity? Like, how does it? So maybe a business that doesn't have an age diverse workforce, why would they even want to seek one out, despite the whole labor shortage and I need to just get people?
Okay, so there's two major problems here. Is you are eavesdropping on the future, and it's the source of innovation by employing young people. That's just, I would argue, a fact. And you will short sight your company if you do not have the wealth of experience that comes with age. I mean, if you look at tech, for example, tech is one of those sectors that has a very, very low diversity in terms of age. It has low diversity in terms of gender, but really in terms of age. And so actually one of the major problems within tech, I think, is they do not have someone putting up their hand going, oh my God, I went through the .com crash. We don't want to go there. Like, can we pivot this way? You haven't got that wealth of experience, I would argue, in tech, which is perhaps why you see potential car crashes and careering in certain directions. Yeah. I think if you are a small business of 18 or so people, and you are thinking, what's this generational stuff got to do with me? I think you have to recognize that in particularly engaging with young people, you are securing the long-term future of your business, because it's not just your diversity that you're going to see in your employees, it's the diversity in your client base or your customer base. So in order to have that diverse range or just have those conversations with those clients, you have to be reflective of society. That's the first thing. I think, though, it's really important for small businesses to go, do you know what? This is what we do, and this is who we need to execute it. And I'm not going to try and be something I'm not. I'm not going to be chasing, Gen Z influencer wannabes, because that's not what my business is about. We make crates or something. And actually, what I need to be is authentically me, authentically this business. And actually, one of the things that Gen Z really responds to, I think, is honesty, transparency, and authenticity. They don't want to be missold a job. They don't want to be missold a position or a business. So actually going, look, the people that work here have to be in the office 3 days a week, quite often have to be here past 6, quite often have to be on site, quite often have to be doing this, laying it out. And in a way, actually, Goldman Sachs is brilliant at this. Goldman Sachs is one of those companies, you will earn shed loads of money, and you will not see your family doing it. So, that honesty is refreshing, because what we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years is arguably a lot of mis-selling corporate cultural purpose, shiny logos, shiny values, and all of this. And actually, it's the honesty and authenticity and the upfrontedness that young people in particular really respond to. I would also say that the interview and application process is absolutely crucial, because what you need more than anything else is not skills, is value alignment. I would argue that the skills should be taught in the business. Don't expect people to come with those skills established, like we've always done throughout history. Companies are the education. The idea that university or school provides us with educated, skilled workforce is actually rubbish. What's clear is that businesses have to have that apprenticeship culture. So don't hire on skills, hire on values. And I was working with a legal firm in London not long ago, and one of the things that a partner said to me was, I cannot understand why people are applying to our company, because we've had so many people leave to start side hustles, to start cupcake businesses, to develop their dancing skills, to go traveling, to do all this. And I was like, the thing I think is key is that perhaps they never wanted to be lawyers in the first place. And actually, they were sold a career that maybe had the status that they were looking for, but not actually was the right career for them. So that's why the interview process has to be an interrogation of values, not of skills or experience.
I love that. So we've talked on the show with other guests before about attracting the right talent, and the key there is the right talent, because you could attract people that have the skills to perform the job, but if they're not aligned to your values, they're not going to stay. They're going to be disengaged. They're either going to quit or they're not going to perform, and it's going to end badly for both of you. So much better to be able.
Mike, I mean, sorry to interrupt there, but I sit on a board of a business here in the UK, and one of the things that we were looking at was, how do you turn your analog workers into digital workers, because digital talent now is at such a premium and is so expensive. You are in a war for talent, but it's all about the money and not about the values and not finding the right people. So we were sort of discussing, actually, can you really upskill the people from analog to digital? And therefore you've invested in them, and hopefully that will be rewarded in loyalty. Because one of the things that I think is really true in tech is that they are not going for values alignment, they are going for money. And because they're in such high demand, they are moving around at such pace.
And I'll piggyback on tech. I think money, yes, but something we see just in our own business is, if you're an engineer, if you're not getting paid, you want to at least be setting yourself up to get paid and learning new skills, right? It's solving really difficult problems and developing the skill of problem solving, developing the skill of the latest tech. So I want to kind of go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, every company is now a tech company. I mean, even my company, I'm a historian. I mean, I'm obsessed with data now. I'm looking at the data of posts and articles and et cetera, et cetera. Every company is now a data company. Every company has a responsibility to upskill their workers, and then won't be able to afford to buy that talent in. There's not enough of it, and it's at a higher premium. So
I've kind of written down here 3 big buckets of ways, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to recap on this, and I want to just maybe wrap today with some practical advice about how to attract different generations in ways that people might not be thinking about. But we talked quite a bit about the differences between the 4 different generations, and the differences are real. And if you don't think they are, they are. And so please understand that. But also coming back to, as human beings, we're more alike than we are different. So there are some strategies that cut through all this. And this might sound silly, but I think it's real and practical. Number 1 is simply caring, right? It's empathy. It's caring in your employees or your bosses or your peers will give you a lot of grace when they know the why you're doing what you're doing. And if they feel and sense that you care, you're going to cut through a lot of those things. Number 2 is to develop. People need and want to grow, whether it's stretch assignments, acquiring new skills. Some people care about money, and so they need new skills to get even more money. Some people don't care about money. It's all about the challenge. In all cases, development of skills solves all those problems, right? And then the last one you just kind of talk about is values and value alignment. When, I suspect Elon Musk is not a terribly easy person to work for, but if your mission in life is to help put people on Mars, you know where you go work, right? And so if your values are all about work-life balance and taking care of children, that looks a whole heck of a lot different than it does if you're trying to put somebody on Mars. In what that work looks like looks very different, but there's value alignment between employer and employee, right? So I love all that.
Right.
Can you just give our audience some practical advice? Okay, we've convinced them you can be a more productive organization. You're building a company of the future by hiring younger generations. You're being wise by not ignoring older generations because they've seen these paths before. They can see around corners for you. I believe you. I need to go recruit and have better diversity of age. What are the things that employers can do to achieve that?
Okay, number 1 is I would basically have the generations collide as much as you possibly can and listen to each other. Listen on a really personal level, as what it was like to be the first woman in the company, or what it was like to grow up with a smartphone in your pocket, and help create that empathy and that generational understanding. Number 2, I would think about education as a democratic skill swap across the generations rather than just old informing the young. So one of the things that they do in France, for example, is that they deliberately within companies match up those employees who are over 50 with those that are under 30. And actually the idea is to mirror, this is best done if you mirror within the family, the grandparents and grandchild than the parent and child. Because if you have a bigger age gap actually within the workplace, that can often be more fertile way of mentoring and cross dialogue and education, because you do not have that perhaps tension or ego or a slight conflict as you do with the parent-child. So actually making the age gap bigger with that reverse mentoring, that mentoring relationship, I think is really important. The third thing I would do is really actually is give the different generations a voice and enable them in an informal or a formal way to really understand that everyone's at a different life stage. And so what things need to be taken into consideration within this company, because we are an age diverse team that have different issues going on, whether it's I need to go and look after my mum in a care home once every Tuesday, or I need to actually make sure that my dog gets a walk on Friday afternoon. Whatever it is, I think one of the key ways of bringing the generations together is in a co-creating format in which we can all sit down and go, do you know what? This is what our lives look like. We're all different ages. That feels very different. We are living different experiences. What is it that the company needs or possibly can do to accommodate that? But crucially, what do we all need to understand and empathize with in order to just take that into account as colleagues?
I think that's a perfect place to wrap. Liza, I really enjoyed talking to you today. Is there a way that you'd like to ask our audience or offer how is it you help your clients and companies or employees? How could we help you help them?
So I spend a lot of my time helping companies really tackling their specific challenges with a multi-generational workforce in the hybrid era, helping them understand the different generations. I do a lot of course-based work on bridging the generation gap, but also on a policy level, what specific initiatives need to happen. I run a online course. I also have a fortnightly newsletter, which is free to subscribe. Go to www.elizaphilby.com. I also have my own podcast on the future of work it's called The Shift with Jimmy McLaughlin and Eliza Philby. And stay in touch via my website and on my socials. Thank you.
So we'll be sure to pop up an exit form for anybody watching this live. That if you want to get in contact with Eliza, that we'll create that opportunity. And if you're watching this on our YouTube, check the links. We'll have a link to Eliza's site on the bottom. So these are complex issues. This is what Asure is here to do, right? So the purpose of this show is to share the very best information we possibly can with employers. One of the things I love and I hate about HR, it's so sometimes focused on compliance. It's the legalistic. It's the Title VII discrimination versus what is the actual value of building diverse teams, right? And so we always play two sides of this coin, where what we do as a company is we help small businesses stay compliant in an ever-changing world where federal laws become state laws, become local city laws. It's extremely complex, so we can help unpack that. But mostly what we care about, it's in the name, human resources. How do you tap into the resources of the human and see that human as a capital? How can you more intelligently deploy that capital by building great teams? So if there's anything we can do at Asure to help you with that, audience, we'd be happy to do so as well. Until next week, Eliza, love talking to you. This was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Would love
Thanks,
to do it
Mike.
again someday. And thanks to everybody else. Until next week.